everybody. I'm Candid Stanisci of CFL Talk. Welcome and thank you for being here. This is the Spanglish World Network on Zingo TV, channel 250. Please remember to download the Zingo TV app at the respective app stores for iOS and Android devices. While you download the app, make sure you rate and leave a comment. Both apps are absolutely free. Zingo TV is available on Google, Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV sticks, Roku sticks, and also on all smart TVs 2016 forward. And don't forget to check out and subscribe to Candid Stanisci 1030 on YouTube. Now joining me as usual is David Morassutti. David, welcome to the program. Little earlier than normal, so it's coffee. Coffee, that's what we're doing right
Coffee
now.
instead of booze?
Yeah, instead of booze.
Uh,
If only. I can't do booze and the show at the same time. They don't coincide well. They don't play well together. But regardless, I guess yeah, it is early in the morning, but it still is before this week's games. We're going to go see a game. I guess we'll do more of a preview. I don't know if there's something to lock up the season. I guess what we can say is that Winnipeg took the decision out of Saskatchewan's hands as to who finishes first in the West. There was no relevance in the East as far as games affecting the standings. So the standings were what there was no chance of them changing. So that was the only situation of consequence. And I guess in all honesty, I don't want to be Winnipeg or Saskatchewan playing BC at this point. If I can start by the effect of that win by Winnipeg.
well, that's the thing, right? I think every team in the West had a very strong end to their season. I actually even better way of putting a more pronounced end to their season because we know that it was a struggle at first to start for the West, right? And then eventually it all kind of came together. So I look at going into the playoffs. I think every team realized how important it was to have momentum, right? Start
Always.
right, and then eventually it was also like, okay, we also have to make sure that we have that balance of are we ready for the playoffs too? And being ready for the playoffs basically means let's make sure we're healthy. So there was that balance there, but for some teams it's also like we need to be in our best form possible because yeah, you look at you brought up a great one with Winnipeg, hottest team in the CFL, that back stretch of the season. You look at BC with Vernon Adams back at quarterback, how different that team has looked, and then even Saskatchewan, right? Like some pretty handedly big wins for them. So I'm curious to see how that all kind of shapes out with the playoffs now around the corner because this is going to be the hardest year I think to predict how things are going to go.
Yeah, Saskatchewan versus Winnipeg to play BC, a team that has been very inconsistent. VA Vernon Adams began the season. We've said this many times, but it's worth repeating. MOP candidate halfway through the season gets injured. They bring in Rourke. Everything's up in the air because, quite frankly, they really changed boats in midstream, didn't they? And what we saw was a failure of Rourke to reacquire or reignite or confirm that he is an MOP playing kind of guy, right? And he wasn't. It was surprising how ineffectual he was. Maybe we, the team, um, you know, the failure that he had in the NFL, it's the only way to describe it, was more for him to overcome than we all thought or realized, right? So now VA rides in the last game and shows that maybe he has become totally healthy and his ability, which we know his high point is very high. Unfortunately, he does have that medium point or low point introduces itself from time to time, but it does make it interesting, that game that Winnipeg won against Montreal, it made that game that much more important because if I'm Winnipeg, I wanna see what he does before we play him.
Well, that's it, right? I think that there's one way that you, if you're BC, that you feel like things are going to be different this time around for you. It's that Vernam's. It's not even the way he's playing either, but it's also the adversity he's gone through. I feel like when a player has gone through what Vernams has gone through, it makes their mindset kind of totally changes a little bit, right? They're not they realize I mean, what's at stake for them, right? Because this is likely going to be his last time, could be potentially his last time playing in BC with the way things are going there. And so, I think he's personally thinking, all right, if this is truly going to be it for me here in BC, I want to make sure it's a memorable, ending to my time here. Again, if that's where it grows, likely based on how things are shaping out, that's where it's going. But then you look at, you know, teams haven't played against, like Winnipeg hasn't played against Vernon Adams in a while. Saskatchewan, I don't think has played against Vernon Adams in a while. Like it's now they got to kind of rehash and relearn how to go up against Vernon Adams, and that's a challenge in of itself. So he's got maybe a bit of an advantage there in that, yeah, he hasn't played a lot of football lately, but other teams maybe don't know what maybe they're going to expect from him as well.
Absolutely. Um, I think this makes the Western, division that has been highly competitive moving towards the end of the year after a slow start for the division. That makes this weekend really important and also makes it very interesting for CFL fans who love the game, to see what's gonna happen in the West. We'll save talking about, what we think will happen in, our preview of the playoffs, um, for a little bit later. I'd like to jump in, Randy Ambrosie. We wanted to talk about this. This is a big story. He took over from Jeffrey Orridge 7 years ago. He came in, to a league that at the time, I'll start by giving what I think are the good things that he did. He really did stabilize ownership in the Canadian Football League. When he came in, there were a lot of questions as to where this league was going in regards to ownership. And he leaves now with probably the strongest ownership group that the Canadian Football League has had in a very long time. I mean, I'm talking decades. I'm talking going back to Jake Gadar and maybe before, if you can imagine. Also, and we could talk about these points, just are the highlights, and we can dive into each one. And the rules that he was a part as commissioner of changing that I think made the game far more interesting and also in the lead in making those changes, enough so that the NFL confirmed that the decisions that the CFL made under this commissioner, were good decisions. And I don't know how you can't poo-poo the NFL copying the CFL as something that doesn't indicate that the CFL was under great stewardship, under Ambrosi.
Well, I look at, yeah, I know that there's a lot of the business side part. A lot of people had their qualms about what Ambrosi has done, but I look at, you brought it up. BC was looking like it was in a bad spot when he took over, right? They weren't drawing a lot of fans. Their owner passed. Their owner died, right, and they needed a new owner to take over there. And I mean, they've struck all the right notes with that one, right? BC's now become one of the thriving markets, probably one of the bigger thriving markets within the last couple of years. And then I mean Edmonton, like that in and of itself, trying to get out of the try to get private ownership for that. That's in of itself a tough sell for any CFL team, especially nowadays, trying to get a private owner there. And I mean, I would say, I mean, if you're going to look at his while BC's his biggest success story, I think his biggest challenge that he had to figure out had to be Montreal, a team that literally he finds an owner. It seems like the ownership group was motivated to how to make this team look like they're going to be on a stable ground. Then that ownership group flames out. CFL retakes control. Instead of deeming it almost like a lost cause, he continued to push. He finds another owner, and now like that team, not only they won a Great Cup with the former ownership group, but now this new ownership group got a team that's tops in the CFL, right? So I think you have to commend him on that. You have to commend on he's gotten that. No, he's figured that part out. There are areas again that I think need work, and that's I think part of maybe where the CFL is heading with this with the decision to obviously with him retiring and deciding to go in a different direction with the new commissioner. But yeah, he brought some good things that I think this league needed. Now it's a matter of can the first off for him he gets a chance now to look back on what he's done and be proud of some of the things, but also know the CFL is now going to be going in a direction maybe he just it's going to be too much work amount of work for him, but maybe he decided this is the time for me to step away and let someone else take on that challenge.
What may have triggered that is the fact that only 4 of the teams sorry, 5 of the teams that supported his return. Reports indicate that there was a 5-4 vote to keep Randy, and that just over the top, yeah, let's keep him, wasn't enough to convince Randy that he's the right guy moving forward. Having that kind of lack of support, speaks to Randy Ambrosie reading the tea leaves, and saying to himself, that's not good enough support for a commissioner in the Canadian Football League. And I admire his decision based on that. Unfortunately, as the commissioner of the Canadian Football League, he's the second longest, being commissioner of the Canadian Football League. Jake Gadar is the only guy that's been longer. And so therefore it's not surprising that he would look back at that kind of stuff and say, I think I've been a part of this more than I need to be and more than it needs me. So it's time for me to move on and have a new voice. Now, in 27, there's another agreement now going to have to be hammered out between the CFLPA and, of course, whoever is the commissioner and the people working with the commissioner to come to an agreement. And he's going to be there till 2025. He'll be there next year until they figure out who a commissioner is. And that gives like 18 months for the new commissioner to hit the ground, a short runway to figure out what's the plan in satisfying the CFLPA and the ownership in coming to an agreement that's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, and you look at if you read Dan Ralph's story, basically not only was the board vote important, but you look at Calgary's president Jay McNeil. He basically said that the next commissioner needs to have a strong business background because there is a big, I think, there's a big negotiation that's set to come about at the end of 2026. I think it's 2026, 2027. That's the new broadcast deal. Plus, there's also as we mentioned, a CBA with the new players. That's that's never been an easy feat for the CFL the last few years. Usually, it's just like, yeah, let's just roll over players. I think understand now that there needs to be a little bit more, a little more give and take from the league when it comes to helping out with the players. So, I think the next commissioner, like I said, not just guy who has a football background, but somebody who is going to be able to help, I think, grow the CFL business in the way that needs to happen. The one big failure I would say under Randy Ambrosie was, expansion, that 10th team. How much we've talked about the need of having that 10th team because of how it'll help the
He wanted
schedule.
that. He wanted that. That if you
Yep.
ask him, I bet you if you ask him, what's your biggest disappointment, unfinished business that you've left behind now that you're leaving as commissioner, it wouldn't surprise me that 10th team is probably the biggest disappointment that he'd had. But and I would add to that, I wouldn't blame him for it. You
No,
know,
it's not all his. It's not on him because
in the 7 years that he had the team, he had the pandemic sandwiched in there, and I think that's what killed the 10th team. If the pandemic hadn't happened, I really believe this, we would have had a 10th team. Economically, Nova Scotia was ready to jump in. Um, of course, it just didn't happen because, quite frankly, everything disappeared.
well, and the big one here is you look at yeah, no, like I do agree that in some way, shape, or form, you do have the pandemic really did impact, but it also just kind of spoke to how much the league didn't prepare well for the pandemic. Like they didn't have the safeguards. Like they were the only. I think lacrosse was the only. Like those two, lacrosse and CFL, were the only two that didn't play during the pandemic.
At
Their
all.
seasons canceled. Which okay, like I can understand. Feasibly the financially wasn't going to work, but the fact that the CFL could not get some sort of form of deal from the government to try and keep it at least for 1 or 2 seasons, right? Like that. I don't know if people remember when he went up to speak to the government about getting the backing to the financial backing, and just I would say ill prepared, but he looked like a fish in a barrel. I mean, look, politicians can be ruthless about this stuff, so I'm not going to put it totally on Ambrosi, but um, like that was a big disappointment there because not only did a lot of players lose financial income that year, right? A lot of jobs, and the CFL had to kind of reshape itself a little bit because of revenue loss and having to catch back up again. So I think that was a little bit of an eye opener for those who are, those in the board of governors realizing maybe we need to and look, ticket revenue is so big, but that's not the only way that leagues make money nowadays. And I think that's gonna be something to watch for with the team with whoever comes in next as commissioner because I think there's a lot of ways the CFL maybe hasn't prioritized making extra revenue.
I think there's a similarity between the NLL and the Canadian Football League, and that is
Oh
they're
yeah.
two leagues that are gate driven. Like for them to make money, they need people to go through the turnstiles. And the pandemic kind of quashed that idea, right? I think another thing the CFL had against it, I have no reason to believe this other than just observationally as opposed to factually. My observations are that the Canadian Football League going to the Canadian government was a tough sell because half their employees were American, and I don't know how the politicians wherever in Ottawa, in Ontario, wherever, or in the provinces, I don't know how full throated a support they could give for the league based on that fact. I do believe it probably had an impact on them not being able to sell Ottawa on support. I think they didn't go there. My impression was at the time, and I beg forgiveness if I'm misremembering, but I do believe the Canadian Football League didn't talk enough about the game itself. They were only talking about why they need the financing, and they didn't highlight why it was important um, to help ensure the safety of the Canadian Football League and the fact that it needed to continue, and to continue, it needed some financial support to bridge the terrible time that was the pandemic. They just didn't do a good sales job on it. And like you said, I agree with you 100%. I don't know that it's Ambrosi's or even the Canadian Football League's fault. I think circumstances obviously could have been the main factor. But the fact is, they did shut down for a year. The fact is, as well, they survived. They came back. They're here. They survived enough that they convinced two really good owners to join the league after that. So, we know the long term damage, wasn't done, that we were afraid that the short term damage existed and was going to be extended did not happen. So, the league survived quite well. And I think it's fair to say that Randy Ambrosie deserves credit for the bounce back as quick as the Canadian Football League did, with instantly finding owners for franchise, one that didn't have any stability in ownership, constantly even disappearing, the Montreal franchise. And then the other franchise, which had a steady hand of previous ownership for decades, two different situations, and they solved both those problems that were different. So I think we have to give Randy Ambrosie and the group that he put together at the Canadian Football League full credit for what they did in that circumstance.
Yeah, no, I think that those are all commendable things, because it's, some people were really worried about the league after the pandemic, and I do think that there is a there's a case to be made that this league truly needs to embrace kind of more non-traditional means right now going forward to try and fit and improve the business model, right? I think that's something that gets missed, is that the league still has a lot of, I would say, older views
Mm-hmm.
how to run the business, which is fine. I mean, it's gotten them this far.
If not older, different. If not older, different views
True.
across the league.
So I think when I look at where I think the league needs to look forward, is it's got to get younger. I mean, not sway totally young, because I still think I think there's, and maybe I'll phrase this the right way. I'm not saying to totally disregard the older crowds that they have, because unfortunately those are the people that are still going to be able to help financially, but they do need to find a way to get in touch with the younger demographic, because that's something that when you're looking at, you know sponsorships, when you're looking at TV rights, they got to be able to say we want to get to the younger demographic too, right? I think that there's an opportunity there to really grab more of that younger crowd, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Essentially, what we're talking about is that, you know, what is it, 25 to 35 group that drives every survey, to reassure advertisers that, whatever the business is that they're contemplating supporting has that age group locked in, right? And the Canadian Football League doesn't have that age group locked in. As much as I love myself, I'm not the kind of person that the CFL needs to attract, to ensure success. But to do
Because
that,
you're already there.
yeah, well, that's the other reason, is they got to find a new group of people.
No, again, that's the older generation is there, because I always constantly hear, how are we going to bring in the younger people, right? It starts with being willing to do maybe the things that are a little uncomfortable at first, but maybe reaps more of a reward.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the commissioner did what he decided to do. I really do think, David, it's about timing as much as anything. That, with the things that are happening in the next couple of years, he needed to be dedicated, um, to those two projects, the CFLPA and the TV contract. Bearing in mind, TSN will no longer be part of the ownership group for the Argos. So, I mean, their their support of the Canadian Football League is strictly going to be a business relationship between the TV network and the league. It's no longer they won't have a vested interest in ensuring the Argos are a profitable entity, right? That's not a subtle difference in the situation.
Yeah, I mean, well that's it, right? Like you look at where other leagues are going right now. Like we have NHL games on Amazon Prime right now. I
Absolutely.
If you asked me 5 years ago if I expected to see that, probably would say very unlikely,
To
right?
that point, I just want to inject that for the two
Hmm.
last weeks, the two last Mondays, Leaf fans couldn't watch the Leafs play unless they had Prime.
Yeah, but there were a lot of people who were talking about the game being on Prime and how they liked the way it was brought differently, right?
Change.
Change, something that's a little new, but it's also a thing that CFL has another problem, and it's kind of
Um,
a thing that we've talked about is
oh, we hit that. I've been a proponent of that for 12 years. That they've had a monotone view of how to broadcast.
not only how it's broadcast, but how it's covered the league.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, but relying on newspapers are good, right? People still do read newspapers. I don't discount that. But
I
this
hope you
league,
don't.
but with newspapers cutting down on staff and stuff like that, the CFL coverage has taken a hit because the people who
Yeah,
now are working for these newspapers, some of them don't even want to bother covering the CFL. But it's also, why are we relying just on newspapers? There are websites. There are other means of. The league needs to start again embracing the digital realm a bit more, right? It's sad that in Toronto, the only people who and cover this team consistently enough, it's myself, it's the Canadian press, and then here and there, it's TSN when they're at practice, or I'll give Ben Grant, obviously X's and Argos. That's been huge too. But if you're looking for that day to day updated coverage, it's not there. There's just not. They're not putting the investment in. That's been a problem too, and it's happening in more and more cities around the league.
absolutely. Um, the When talking about media, you can't not talk about Pierre Carl Palado, Quebecor. He has a sports network. Um, so with TSN getting out of ownership, now the playing field has changed completely. Where you had TSN, the network that broadcasts the Canadian Football League, now has an owner that wasn't there before that has a TV network in Quebec. And I really do believe that the next uh, person that comes in is going to have to really reinvent the television broadcasting of the Canadian Football League. I believe there's going to be more of a split. You know, the subject of Prime that you mentioned is a perfect indication of all things old need to be renewed and changed. And we were going through a pattern change. And what's it going to look like in the Canadian Football League? I'm suggesting, and I believe that it will be more than TSN broadcasting CFL games. And I think not because TSN hasn't done a good job, because they have, but I've always believed that if you have two networks broadcasting the same league, the competitive nature of how they broadcast will be ignited and it'll be better for the league. I truly believe that. That's not a lack of gratitude for the the network, Bell Media and TSN being there for the Canadian Football League when they needed it, because that's what they did and that's who they are, and I'll never forget that, and I don't think anybody should. But there's a time and place for gratitude, and then there's a time and place for growth, change for the better. And change for the better speaks to more than one broadcaster broadcasting a sport. We've seen it in every other sport. Any sport that's successful isn't dedicated to one broadcaster. They have multiple broadcast companies that broadcast, and that opens you up to reaching more people, right? Because there's people, let's be honest here, Quebecor and their network, that they have people who are watching their network that aren't watching the Canadian Football League because the Canadian Football League isn't on it. There are people that watch Sportsnet that, for a while there, I heard nothing of the Canadian Football League. And now, Sportsnet being the sole owner at this point, anyway, of the Canadian Football League Toronto Argonauts, will have to be more invested in promoting the league. And now TSN doesn't have that attachment to ownership, where now they're saying, you know what, we're ready to take a step back. The table's set. There's no doubt the table's set. How it all plays out, I don't know. But I can tell you how the table's set. The table's set. TSN now doesn't have to broadcast the Canadian Football League. Sportsnet does. And then you've got a Montreal owner that has his own network. I mean, so the table's set for change.
The table is set, and it's and look, we've been talking about needing this for a while, but change can only happen if people are really ready to embrace it as well. And I think maybe back in the past, oh man, like I look at the board of governors, right? Maybe it's also one of those where there's people who just are content with where the league is and don't want to take the chances maybe to do things a little different, because it could not work out, and then you're kind of scrambling to fix it. I get that. Like the global initiative, I'll say, was, I think, a nice idea, but the problem is that when you're trying to push and get that global expansion, global stuff, it came at the cost of not really um, putting an importance on the home brand. What are you making ensure that your local product in Canada, right, gets the investment before you even start looking internationally. I had no problem with bringing in global players and stuff like that, but it was almost like they were trying to run before they could walk with that, because there's still, I think, problems here in Canada that needed to be sorted out before they went with this global initiative. But that was a case of the CFL trying something different that, you know what, it wasn't the worst thing in the world.
No, it yielded. I think I personally think it was a great idea, and the reason I think it was a great idea is that it opened up the game world. It was the only way the CFL could open up the game to the world, right? They're not going to find a major city in Europe or Mexico or anywhere else that would like to have one of their football games, because if they did, the CFL would be there. You know, taking their games away from home teams is not something the CFL has never done. So, they have the system in place to do such a thing. So they did it. Randy did what he could, and I remember being at the exhibition. I think it was the Queen Elizabeth building when I had a chance to talk to him about this global initiative, and I asked him, "Is this just your way of trying to, you know, open up the game around the world?" And he told me that's exactly what I'm hoping this does. And you know what? It did it work? Well, there's talk all the time about interested parties, like in Mexico. There's talk about players that would never have played in the Canadian Football League, who have hometowns that aren't in Canada or the US, where that interest at least is being explored at the very least. But the CFL is good at one thing, and they've always been good at one thing, one of things, not just the only thing. They've been good at finding connections in places where, how can I phrase this? Where they're going is in a place where people are hungry for the game of football and or what it does, and are ignored. For example, black players back in the day. For example, you know, the East Coast and now the West Coast, new locations for the games. You know, the inclusion thing that the Canadian Football League talks about has been their bread and butter um, ever since I can remember. And it is one of the strengths of the Canadian Football League that, again, with the rules, that's another example of finding new ways to do things. And I think it's all about, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. And from time to time, I'm really grateful that the Canadian Football League leans in on that. And they've done it over the years, and I'm grateful that they've done that. Now it's kind of funny, you know. Now they have to enter into the mainstream. That's what we're talking about when they say the table's being set. You know, they've been more specialized until now, and now they're going to have to, you know, spread their wings and try to compete, you know, on a wider scale, and in fact, a deeper scale. It's no longer going with one network and going with one set of ideas. They're going to have to be open, and there's going to be time necessary for the new commissioner. As I said, I repeat, they have a contract to discuss with the CFLPA, and they have, you know, um, changes in ownership for television as well. And those are the two major partners that allow the CFL to exist, and they have to be successful with those two parties to flourish.
Well, it is one of the things. Yeah, you have to find a way to make your. y- It has to be collaborative effort in a lot of ways. Anything they do, like the players at times didn't feel like they were partners with the league. It felt like they were employees of the league, and I think that's been the big change they've been wanting. I think they've gotten some of that. I guarantee they probably areas where they feel like they can improve, but I think when you look at when I consider when I joined and started covering the league, it's changed. I mean, players feel like they're more involved in a lot of the processes. But I'm sure there's ways that we wish they can do more. Like the last CBA, I think really pushed. I think that idea of making the players more partners. I mean, that's you got to credit the league for realizing that and pushing forward with that idea.
Well, the commissioner was a former player, played for three teams, so
Yeah.
you know he kind of understood the position of the players. And I do also, you know, have to say that part of the pandemic thing was something that, as you said, made the players not feel so good about their relationship. Before we go on to this week's games, you can wrap up Commissioner Ambrosi's tenure and if we've missed anything.
No, I mean, look, I think you know it's it what we've seen. I think we've seen commissioners. I think with worse tenures, in my opinion, than Ambrosi. Right. I think people tend to nitpick quite a bit on what he's done, but I think he should look back on his tenure and say, look, I did accomplish some things. Like there are things that he can hold his head up high on. And you know what? The league also I think can understand where it can find areas to grow, and maybe that's something that the new commissioner will be able to do. And I don't mind that. They did have some stability at the commissioner position for a while because I think Jeffrey Orridge didn't even last that long in
No,
compare right as we talk about, he had a really long tenure, Ambrosi, and I think that speaks to the CFL wanting to really not just do it. They wanted to properly commit to whatever he was trying to do, right? And so I think you got to give him credit for being able to, um, being able to get the league to understand where it needed to go, um, and where areas maybe hopefully he gives them suggestions of where he thinks they should go because there's still areas that needs to be improved.
My final comment on Randy Ambrosie, he barreled in when he first became commissioner as he really was the face of the league. He was everywhere. He spoke to everyone. He was willing to speak to everybody, every blogger, every writer, every reporter, every interview, every TV station. He was everywhere until he wasn't. He went from being the face of the league to where is Randy? That became kind of his calling card. Those were his two calling cards. He came in, um, introducing himself to the CFL world, and he's gone out really silent, not speaking publicly enough, I think, which might speak to why he decided to leave as well. It wasn't fun for him, I don't imagine. If you're staying away from the media and not talking to them, is it because of him or is it because he's being told not to say anything? It doesn't matter. It's the same thing. So um, that's the way he goes out. He goes out not like how he came in. He came in all full of I want you to know to all right, I'll do stuff and my people will tell you all about it. And I don't that's not a negative or a positive, just an observation. Now, speaking of observations, we got our playoffs starting. We know which teams only have to win one game to make it to the Grey Cup, Winnipeg and Montreal, and we know the four teams that are going to play each other for the right to play that last game before the Grey Cup. So you just need to win two or one game to get into the Grey Cup. So it's a short trip, which means boy, you better be ready to play. And that's what all the four teams this weekend need to do. Ottawa looked, if you go by the second half, they looked ready. If you look at Saskatchewan and BC, they both look ready. So we should be in for in Montreal and Toronto as well. We should be really looking forward to a couple of really good games this weekend.
Well, and that's it, right? There's no second, third chance, right? This is you come in and you're looking to make your mark in a lot of ways. So this weekend's games, like these could easily have been East and West final, with the way that the season has gone. But um I think this year, as I said, it could be anyone's year. It really could be. I don't know. Yeah, people look at the records in the standings, say these two teams, Winnipeg and Montreal, deserve to be the favorites, and I don't.
They
I
do.
no, I won't disagree with that.
They do.
But I do think that this year, don't be surprised if we see an upset or two,
Well,
or an
statistically,
upset or two, and I mean that in the loosest way possible.
statistically, your point is 100%, and I'll put it this way. If Toronto beats Edmonton, they're one win behind Montreal for the season. If Winnipeg doesn't win and Saskatchewan does, Saskatchewan's in first. Does anybody does any fact speak to the closeness of those teams than that? It was that close. It's not that far. Even though you said is 100% true. Surprised Winnipeg and Montreal in first? Not at all. They looked and were the teams that could be at the top. But how closely they were being nipped at the heels is clear statistically. So then we end up with the two teams that are behind the second place teams. We talked a little bit about BC and VA turning things around a little bit. I mean, short sample size of his ability to turn this team around, but he proved that it can be turned around, which it did in the last couple of games. And then with BC, that last half against Toronto tells us Toronto has something to concern themselves with, and they better be ready to play because that's what I've seen. That's what I've seen in the last part of the season. I've seen an Ottawa team back to being healthy and being a totally different team than they were recently, more like the team that was threatening first place versus Montreal.
Yeah, I think the health part, you can't discount that, right? And I think with Ottawa, the only thing I would be concerned about offensively is their run game, but the passing game. I mean, I think this is the best version of this Ottawa receiving group, right? Justin Hardy, Braylon Addison, Jalen Acklin, Dominic Rhymes,
Yep.
Khalil Pimpleton, who's been a rising star the last few, the second stretch of the second half, whatever you want to call it. Now they they did have a very tough time against Toronto in the last game. I know that the big fourth quarter push, but I'm curious to see. This is an Ottawa team that went from barely being able to score 20 points to then putting up back-to-back 30-point games. So I'm curious to see. Have they figured it out? Or was this a stretch of the season where teams were taking their foot off the gas a little bit and they found ways to getting that production? You still got that production, but I'm curious to see, is this Ottawa team now ready to really take that leap forward, right? Is this offense, because I think it comes down to their offense. Their defense is going to do, um that defense has found ways to get to the quarterback. That defense found a way to make turnovers, but can that offense pick it up? And look, Darius Pickett, I think that's a tough injury for any team to overcome, especially Ottawa, because I think
Mm-hmm.
he was their MVP. He was their best defensive player, and to lose him to an Achilles injury like for the rest of the year, I think that's changed that defense a little bit. The tone of that defense and the leadership with that defense.
I think the most important thing that I think will tell the story offensively is quarterback pressure. Both those teams have quarterbacks um, that can make plays under pressure.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm interested in seeing is, can the defensive lines get past that part? That extra little bit of pressure that can cause problems to happen, like happened with Kelly last year against Montreal. Drew Brown is a great quarterback. We're going to find out. He's very quick with passing the ball. He's a very good quarterback, and he helps the offensive line with his ability and his technique and his execution at quarterback. So it's going to be interesting to see the defenses, if they can penetrate the offensive lines enough to really cause the quarterbacks to make what we talk about all year. If you want to win, you can't make mistakes under center. And that's going to be the key. Last year, the Argos didn't make it to the Grey Cup because their quarterback couldn't play under pressure. We can make all kinds of excuses and we can talk about all kinds of stuff that was going on. But the bottom line is, both these quarterbacks, to be successful, are going to need a little bit of time. They don't need that much. But if they have no time, David, then this game's going to be fought. The result's going to be what happens in the trenches. And the other thing is, for the Argos, they've got a secondary that I think is going to have to do some really good work. And the same is true for Ottawa. The secondaries are both going to be challenged, because if their defensive lines don't put enough pressure on the quarterbacks, they both could suffer from a lot of points being scored. And I don't think the last game in Toronto that Ottawa played against Toronto is something that won't happen in this next game. The question is, I don't know if the answer is, will the last touchdown win the game? I don't know if it'll be to that point, but I'm hedging my bets by saying so. I think it's going to be the last score that wins the game.
Oh, I think. I do think this is going to be a close finish. I don't think one team. I would be surprised if one team, took a commanding lead and that's how it all right. So I just don't see that being the way that this game goes. Just frankly because both teams are there's a lot of ways that they're matched up pretty favorably with each other,
except for one.
Experience.
A running game.
Running game and experience, in my opinion, because Ottawa has players that have played in this league for a while, but the Toronto's got more players that have been on the winning side. Guys have gone through the battle to get to a Grey Cup. That I think is also another. Yeah, I think the running game. I think if you're Toronto,
They have an advantage.
you have to establish that running game because
They
if
have
you're
a
putting
great
this all
covering
into Chad Kelly's hands, we've seen it. We have seen it. When you try to put it all in Chad Kelly's hands, it's not the same. It's not the same. When this team is balanced, that's when they're at their best, right? And
going in,
Ottawa knows that. Ottawa
yeah,
wants to put the ball in Chad Kelly's hands.
going going by history and what we've seen, the one advantage the Argo has, it's really two advantages. Their ability to smother the run game of the opposition and to expose the opposition's defense against the run. That's the one advantage the Argos have. And if they are able to do what they're capable of doing, and Ottawa can't figure it out, can't stop it, then the Argos could win this game walking away. But I just don't think that's the kind of finish that's going to happen. But that is a big advantage the Argos have. Big advantage. Their defense against the run and their ability to run will make a big difference in this game if they use that historical advantage in that game.
Yeah, well, well, that's it, right? I think when you look at the advantages for, I mean, you look at also the games that they played against. Like this is also a year where Toronto and Ottawa didn't play against each other that much. So there is film, but there's not, like, I don't know if there's good enough of a sample size to really know how these two teams match up right now.
Injuries too cloud the issue.
Injuries too, right? But I mean, if you look at the betting odds, Toronto's favored by a lot. They're favored by 6.5. Like that's that. Like usually, like we think it's gonna be close. The betting lines would suggest everyone thinks the Argos are gonna at least win this game by a touchdown minimum. So that's something to be said. 52.5 is the over under. Like, do you expect this game to be high scoring at all?
Yes, I think it can be. Will it? I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe we should move on. We should maybe move on to the next game too.
Yes. Let's. I got a message out to our producer if we can go an extra couple of minutes because I would like to respect the other games, Saskatchewan and BC, a little more. They've got AJ Ouellette in Saskatchewan that is going to be a factor, right, in that game because again, the running game is going to matter, and we do know that BC maybe doesn't have the same kind of strength in the running game, but I think to compensate for that, Vernon Adams is a pretty elusive guy that is notorious for making broken plays decide games.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, you look at and again, you look at the matchup between these two teams. The games that they played against each other, there was a lot of injuries played a big part in I think like if I'm not mistaken, Vernon Adams had like over 400 yards against the Riders who didn't have their full defense at health. But then, the last time Saskatchewan played BC, it was Nathan Rourke at quarterback, and that didn't go BC's way. So you've seen teams that have had two different ends of the spectrum here. But, I think this game is going to be, I think where I'm still struggling with BC is that defense going to be good enough. I think offensively, they're good. They got guys that can get offense. They can produce. But, Saskatchewan's going to want to rely on, as you said, the defense and the running game. They want to keep the ball out of Vernon Adams' hands Jr. How do you do that? You own the possession battle. You win that battle, and you do not. You basically have to make sure that your defense is ready for whatever BC is going to throw at them. It's going to be hard. Like I don't think. I do think Saskatchewan has the more well-rounded team because they can beat you in different ways. but BC has the higher ceiling with its offense.
Yeah, and you know what it's gonna if I can I love talking about quarterbacks. So we talked about VA now. Trevor Harris. Trevor Harris's accuracy can help can help deal with a bit more pressure, right?
Mm-hmm.
His accuracy and his quick ability to make passes will buy him will take away time from the defensive charge. So, this is what we're going to see is will his accuracy continue to be stellar? And will he be able to make the big plays? He has after a while in his career where he had trouble in the red zone, he has recently been more than capable of dealing with the red zone. He's done a great job of that, in fact.
Yeah, I think with Trevor Harris, he just has to make sure he doesn't beat himself, right? The accuracy part, you're totally right. If you're going to go up against a defense like BC, make them impatient, right? He doesn't have to go out and air out the ball a bunch, right? And having that running game is going to be big for him, okay? Because if a play's not there down the field, check it down to your running back, right? And I think he will do that. I think a mature Trevor Harris is what Saskatchewan needs. They can't have a Trevor Harris that's going to try to play hero. We've seen it. It has not worked out well for him. That game against Toronto, especially, right, where he tries to air it down the field, or he tries to throw it out of his own end zone and it gets picked off, right? Don't let the defense read what you're going to do.
Error is the
Be
first error is the first syllable of error.
mhm,
It could become
exactly.
go from error to error. So, that's yeah, he definitely has to be patient in that regard. But I like the fact that, you know, Mace, we enjoyed talking to him at the Grey Cup last year. We didn't know at the time, and I don't think he even knew that he had a chance to be the head coach of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. But this team has become a little more disciplined than it's ever been. And we all knew that that was one of the problems with Saskatchewan, that their lack of discipline cost them games. And so we'll see if they can be disciplined in this game. That's going to be one of the things they're going to have to be. They're going to have to be Corey Mace like, not old Saskatchewan Roughrider like. They're going to have to be disciplined, not take bad penalties,
Yeah.
and it's going to be hard not to take bad penalties because they're up against a quarterback that if you're the defensive unit, you could become part of a highlight reel really quick when it comes to him.
No, right? And like, I think that's another thing too, that we're talking about quarterbacks, we're talking about defenses, offensive players on the field. We haven't even talked about the coaches. This is Corey Mace's first playoff game as a head coach. Now he's coached a lot of playoff games as a coordinator, but this is the first as a head coach. And we saw him, in a game this year in Toronto where he didn't exactly have his best coached game because, Toronto, he tried to win the game rather than win the game, right? I don't know if you catch my drift, where he was trying too hard to do something he didn't have to do, and it cost his team in the end, right? Managing the game.
Yeah.
And we talk about some coaches are good at managing the game, but there's a way to do it. There's a way to do it right, right? If you're going to manage the game, don't be afraid to take chances, but you better not make the boneheaded play, right? You can be conservative, but you got to pick your spots on when it's the right time to do it.
What that speaks to is putting your team in a position to win, not lose, and not make a decision that takes the game away from the players. And that's the nice edge that coaches are on, right? Because sometimes the coach will get to the point where I'm gonna ask for a review on this play. And they do it sometimes in an attempt to keep momentum on their side or take it away from the other team. And then they don't have the flag when they need it. That's just an example of how a coach can impact a game, and that's just one example. There are a lot of ways coaches can, make bad decisions. Many of them far more subtle that experts can share with everybody here better than I can. I'll be the first to
Mhm.
admit. But I do know that coaches, the one thing that coaches have to do well, almost perfect, is prepare their team. And we know that Corey Mace is great at preparing his teams as a defensive coach. We witnessed it for a few years here in Toronto, watching the games, how well prepared his defenses were. And we look at the experience, second generation experience in coaching that is in BC. You know, Campbell is, his dad was a historic figure in coaching in the Canadian Football League. And he is one as well. He's earned the right to be considered that way too. And so we know he knows what he's doing. And he's very forward thinking as well. That's the other thing that Campbell is in BC. Very forward thinking. We sat there at the interviews, if you remember, when he said he was going to bring this young quarterback in and he's going to be their number one quarterback. I mean, I was wondering whether that was just something he was putting out there to sort of throw the media off. As it turned out, he knew what he was saying. So, I respect both these coaches for different reasons, but respect them each equally, really.
Well, that's it, right? Well, yeah, no, he certainly knew what he was doing. And I very rarely do we ever question Campbell. I don't think I've ever really ever questioned his decision making. At times it's gotten his team in trouble. We've seen that, but no, I think when you look at BC, they're a team that leaves it all out on the field. You won't say that they lost the game because they weren't trying, right? Or they weren't trying their best to go out and win a game. It's there's a bit of a there is a bit of you know this year especially, did they create too much of a distraction with the Nathan Rourke situation? I think that's something that every team has to kind of struggle with, right?
It played out.
Um, but I do think that they did do the right thing with, in a way it might have pushed Vernon Adams in a way that maybe they felt they needed as
But he's
well.
been pushed that way his whole career. He has seen, the savior-like quarterback join a team in Hamilton, in Montreal, and now in BC. He's never been a lock as a starter wherever he's been. He's been a piecemeal hero, and is it only because of how he's treated, or is it how the inconsistency which he has displayed? I think I lean heavier on his inconsistency, where his game has a couple of chinks in the armor. But here's the beauty of being a quarterback in football. You just need to get on that run, that confident run, right? Which he can do. We know he can do that. The guy, his backup, could do that as well. He just hasn't done it this year. And we see Harris on the other side, who is a guy who's earned the respect of this league and all the fans and the teams that he's played for. And now it's a question of whether he can put it all together in this game, and hopefully for his sake, the next game. He has not won a Grey Cup. Probably one of the best quarterbacks in the league over the past, 10 years? And he hasn't won a Grey Cup. He's the only one, other than Mazzoli, I guess, to be fair, that has been a star in this league that hasn't won a Grey Cup.
No, I don't disagree with that, right? Like when you like, especially both quarterbacks have been through their fair share of ups and downs. I think if you would ask them, what do you think is bit they both will say the only thing missing in their careers is that Grey Cup, right? I look at the Trevor Harris. He's at least gone far. He's gotten to that Grey Cup game. Vernon Adams hasn't gone there yet, right? But I also think that Vernon Adams has been as close, I think, as he ever is going to be to getting that Grey Cup game as well.
Oh, and let me be clear, he's won a Grey Cup.
Yeah.
He just didn't get a chance to
He
be
was never he wasn't the guy.
yeah, in
I
Ottawa.
think that's the difference. Having that Grey Cup ring, and they'll talk about, oh, he had the experience of being on the team and this and that. It means something totally different when you are the guy.
But he helped get the team there. He helped get the
Yeah.
team there in Ottawa. I don't want there to be a
Oh yeah.
misunderstanding here. I do not want to poo-poo his success. He's had a lot of success, like you said, and he's had the success to be on the winning sideline at Grey Cup. But he just hasn't been the guy. And
Mhm.
and you know, he's done everything to be the guy. He just hasn't, taken that last step. And this is a golden opportunity for him because I think this is probably, and I don't think this is an exaggeration. This is probably the best team he's been on with the best chance to win a Grey Cup that he's been
Probably,
the starter for. I can't think, when he inherited Ottawa, they weren't as good after they won the Grey Cup. Time
yeah.
proved that, right? When
Yeah.
he was in Toronto, he was only a backup. So now here he is in Montreal. Um, it was just before the team was good enough to win a Grey Cup, and he went to Saskatchewan. So by default, this is probably the best team he's had and the best chance to win a Grey Cup as a starter.
Mhm. Most complete team I think he's been on for sure.
Yeah, in a position under center for sure.
Mhm. No, I
Well,
totally agree with that.
so I guess I think Toronto will win their game. Um, uh, I guess there's a little bit of bias there because that's the team I follow, if that's worth anything, if that honesty is worth anything. But I really don't think Ottawa's out of the picture. I've made it clear, and I probably teed off a few Argo fans by what I said, but you know what? It's the truth. Ottawa can win this game. That's just a certain path. They need a certain path to win it. And then I'll go with Saskatchewan winning because ultimately, really, it's funny. AJ Willette's going to be the straw that stirs this drink. The question is, the only question for Saskatchewan to win in my mind that doesn't create a situation where it's a toss up is how well AJ Willette runs. If he runs healthy, if he's the bull in the china shop that we know him to be, David, we saw firsthand here in Toronto,
Mhm.
that'll give Saskatchewan an edge that'll be difficult for BC to overcome. And I'll pick Saskatchewan basically because AJ Willette is going to be a difference maker in that game.
I do think that in this game, I'll start with the BC one. I I like BC's chances. I just there's something about Saskatchewan with that balance that they have that makes it tough for me to say that BC could easily win this game. I think they'll BC with the way their offense has been playing. If their defense gives them a chance, if the defense finds a way to make life miserable for, I think they got first. BC's got to stop the run. They got to make Trevor Harris have to throw
Absolutely.
the ball a bunch. Don't let this be a game where Trevor Harris needs to make only a few passes to beat you.
Or he throws when he wants to.
Yeah.
You got to make him throw when he doesn't want to, or
Yeah.
shouldn't. To your
No,
point,
exactly, right? So I do think that if you are Toronto, going to Toronto, I think it's that balance. They need the balance to win. Um, I don't think it's going to be as handily as what the betting experts believe, but I do think that they are the team that's in their best form right now. And if that defense finds a way to make life miserable for Drew Brown, I think that's the recipe for success, in my opinion.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And well, David, it's at that point where we're down to the last couple of weeks in the Canadian Football League. It seemed like just a little while ago we started the season.
Hmm.
It moved
I
quick.
know
Another
It's crazy that we're at this point right now, for sure.
Yeah, it moved quickly. Well, for those of you looking forward to those games this week, whether you share our opinions or not, I think the relevant thing to say here is I truly believe these are going to be two really good games. They're going to be worth watching, and I'm telling you, the intrigue is there. As much as it sounded like we picked winners, they're not locks, and that's the beauty of the Canadian Football League. And you know what? They're not locks before the 3-minute warning. So a lot can change if we've learned nothing about the Canadian Football League.
Mhm.
There's a whole nother game that could be played after the 3-minute warning. We've seen it in the Grey Cup. We've seen it in playoff games. And of course, we've seen it so many times in regular season games. David, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Frank.
All right, he's David Morassutti. I'm Candid Frank Stanisci. Thank you for watching CFL Talk, airing live Mondays at 4 p.m. normally, but this was a special airing closer to the playoff games in advance. The show can also be heard on the Spanglish World Radio Network. For CFL Talk news, entertainment, and other programming we offer, please check out spanglishworld.ca. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, live it. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget Candid Frank Stanisci, 10:30 on YouTube. Ciao, ciao for now.